Good morning, everybody. We'll be in Matthew chapter 26, verse 36, picking up where we left off last week. I'm going to flip over there and follow along, which I highly encourage. But again, it's a beautiful morning the Lord's gave us. And as always, it's a great day to be in the house of the Lord, to come into His house and be in His presence and study this word, get a little bit closer to this great and mighty God we serve with our brothers and sisters, and have good fellowship with His Spirit and each other. And again, we'll be in Matthew chapter 26, starting at verse 36. And where we left off last week, Jesus had just had the Last Supper with His disciples. Judas had went to go and do his business to betray Christ. And Christ had told them, the things that were about to happen, and that, everybody was going to be offended by Him and they would leave Him. And Peter had said, I'll not deny you. I'll be with you even to the end, even to death. And, Christ told him, you'll deny me 3 times. And he's like, no, I won't. But, Christ knows all things. So they made their way to the garden. And that's where we're picking up this morning. Then cometh Jesus with them unto a place called Gethsemane, and saith unto the disciples, Sit ye here while I go and pray yonder. And He took with Him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and began to be sorrowful and very heavy. So, Christ knew what was fixing to happen. He knew the trials and tribulations that He was fixing to go through, and that weighed upon His flesh, upon His spirit, and it was heavy. I don't think that He was having doubts about having to do what He had to do, because He loved us and He knew it had to happen. But, He knew it was going to be a great burden when He was going to have to bear and go through. So, He was feeling that weight to come in, that He knew that it was His time. So what example did He give us here? He's going alone to pray. He took His friends with Him to pray. That's what they were supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be praying with Him and for Him. And then He was praying Himself, because He, obviously it's always great if you've got people, brothers and sisters, that pray for you. But the best thing to do is pray for yourself. But of course, there's times it's hard for us to pray. So you get your friends to pray for you. He's showing us His example and how important prayer really is. And, Christ knew what He was about to go through. And so He went to His Father to get strength. He went to His Father to get understanding and to get strength and guidance and all the things that prayer can do for us. And that's a great example. That's why prayer is always important. And why Christ was always praying. Before He did anything, He prayed. He talked to His Father and He found out, is this what you want me to do? And then He went and did it. He was obedient. Even here facing death, He's still being obedient. He's still praying. He's still seeking the will of His Father. And that's the example that He set for all of us. Then saith He unto them, My soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. Tarry ye here and watch with me. So He went to His friends and He's like, look, I'm praying. I have this great burden. Pray with me. He's asking for help, support, and backup. That's something that we sometimes struggle with, because, we think, well, I don't want to burden anybody else, and, I can get through this on my own. I don't need any help with it. I've prayed about it. Well, we're supposed to pray for each other. It's the example that He set for us. We're supposed to support each other and help each other in times of need. And sometimes praying may be all we can do. You may come to me with a problem that I can't help you with, but I can pray. And, we look at it as like the last thing we could do or the least thing we can do, when it should be the first, because it's the greatest thing we can do. When we ring those prayer bells of heaven for us or our family or friends or those around us, and we try to get God's attention to this, which, He knows all things. But when we come together, like His Word tells us to do, and we have that communion together and that community of prayer, then God's like, look, these are my people being obedient to my Word. They're coming together in my name, asking me to move upon this one thing. And He can move greatly in those things because we're being obedient to the Word, because that's what the Word tells us to do. And again, we cannot get away from obedience. It's over and over and over throughout the Word, and seeking His will and that obedience to Him and following this Word, living this Word, taking this Word into our hearts, our souls, our minds, and breathing this Word. That's how the Spirit and Christ and God can dwell in us, is when we ingest this Word, we listen, and we're obedient to the Spirit when it leads us to do things. We are obedient to the Word when it tells us to do things because it's all in agreement. You know, there's never any division between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And Christ was the living Word, so the Word ties right in with that. And so we have to know this Word. That's how we defeat the enemy. That's the example Christ gave us. When Satan tempted him, he used the Word. And he was obedient to the Father. He obeyed the Word. He obeyed his Father. That's what we need to do. So we need to pray. We need to be obedient. And when he went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. So this was something that he wasn't looking forward to doing. This was going to be a hard task. He knew what was about to happen to him. It was going to hurt. It was going to be painful. It was going to bring upon his death. So, it wasn't something that he was, he was doing this out of love. And he knew he was the only one that could do it. But, he knew there was going to be a hard trial. So he's praying to his Father. But he's not saying, oh, don't make me do this, don't make me do this, don't make me do this. That's not what he said. He was saying, Father, in your will, if it can be another way, let it be. But not as I want, but what you want. So he's being obedient. And there's going to be times God's going to ask us to do things that are uncomfortable. He's going to ask us to do things that's going to make us step out of that comfort zone. He's going to call us out of that boat, out onto the water, like he did Peter. It's like, we have to say, okay, look, I have to trust him. I have to be obedient and follow him and go out and do these things, just like Christ did. But of course, he spent time in prayer, and that's where he got his strength from, because he was communicating with God. That's how we're going to get through those hard trials. Because when we pray and we get a little bit closer to him, and he can fill us a little more in his spirit, that gives us that strength, and that we can walk with in him. Because I know I can't do anything without him. I've tried that, and I know where that led me, and the roads that it led me down, and how I was broken and sick, and I was dying. I was full of sin and darkness, and there was no good until he came. And then, I repented, and I was changed. I was washed in that blood and filled in the Spirit, and then I can do all things through Christ. None of us are anything without him. We remember what we were without him. We remember where we were. And now we can see that there's endless possibilities of things we can do if we're obedient to him and serve him like we're supposed to. So he will get us through. It's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be fun. There's going to be hard times, But, even Christ, he showed us that even unto death, he was obedient. He's our example. And he cometh unto the disciples, and findeth them asleep, and saith unto Peter, What? Could ye not watch with me 1 hour? So again, here, he called out his friends. This was his closest group, his disciples. This was his inner circle. This was his trust. This was the people he trusted the most, except for his Father, which we're getting to here. And he's like, they fell asleep on him. So it's good when we have friends, we have loved ones, we have people we can confident in, that know that, they're serving God. They're firm believers. They're blood washed and blood bought, and they're renewed and reborn in the Spirit. And that they're going to pray and they do the things they say they're going to do. But we have physical limitations. I can't always be there for you. I may be at work, or I may be asleep, or whatever it may be. But God's the only one that's always going to be there for us. So we have this example here. He called out his friends, the closest one to him. And they fell asleep because they were tired. They tried, but they failed. And they didn't mean to fail him. It just happened. They were exhausted. They're human. They have flesh and blood. They're going to fail sometimes. But so he's saying, like, could you not just watch for an hour? But so he knew that. And he knew that he had to lean fully on God. But he was trying to show them too that example. It's like, we can't put our full entire trust in anybody outside of Christ, outside of God. His Holy Spirit and this Word. But people will fail us. Sometimes they don't mean to. Sometimes they do it because they just don't care. They give up. It doesn't matter what it is. But sometimes people try their best and they just can't do things for us. They're not able to do things. So we have to, it's good to have people you confident, but God still has to be first. It goes back. Everything cycles back. It goes right back to that first commandment, that God has to be first and foremost. There can be nothing at all before him. It has to be him. He has to be first. So we have to lean on him. Like I said, now, is it good to have people that support us? Yes. Can we have some confidence in people? Yes. But we can't have that full confidence in anyone outside of Christ and God. He told him again, watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. So he's given him a great lesson here. You know, we kind of hear these verses and we kind of glance over that, sometimes gloss over it pretty fast. And we're like, well, of course, we know the flesh is weak, the spirit's strong. You know, the flesh represents the darkness and it's weak, it's sin. And you know, the spirit is the light and it's holy, it's God. And that's where we get all our strength from. But we need to look at that a little bit closer. Because he says, watch and pray. So that means we need to be aware of what's going on. We need to challenge the things that we see, that we hear, and look and stop looking with just physical eyes. We need to have our spiritual eyes open. You know, why are the things going on in our lives that we see? You know, when we watch the news, why are these things happening? What's all this stuff going on? And so we can see that that's that spiritual battle that's setting up for these end times that we all believe and know that we're in, because the times of the seasons. He's telling us to watch, to be careful, and also pray, because we're not going to understand things on our own. And we have to pray and say, God, show me what this means. Reveal to me what your truth is. What do I need to understand about what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing? All these things that's going on, you know, here in my community, in my home, and around the world, on the other side of the world. Some people are like, well, that's 6,000, 10,000, 12,000 miles away. Who cares? That doesn't have any effect over me. Spiritually, things do, because there's things happen in this Bible, the things that the prophets have prophesied about, the things that Jesus Christ told us were going to happen, they're unfolding right now. If we would just see that with the spiritual eyes. This world is asleep. You know, this society that we're in, they keep saying that everybody needs to be woke, needs to be woke, needs to be woke. And you know, there's so many sad things that are going on. There's so much hate and anger and distrust, and people, you know, that maybe they don't feel like they can trust or like people that are a little bit different, that look a little different, talk a little different, whatever it is. That's just evil. That's sin. That's the devil trying to spread confusion in this time that we need to all be coming together. So, you know, I say that we don't need to be woke, but we need to be awakened. Our eyes need to be open. We need to see. We need to turn to God and start standing together with our brothers and sisters that, you know, they're of different colors, they're different backgrounds, of different places and things like that, because God created all of us. He didn't want division. Division is from the devil. God wants us in unity and to come together and love each and every one of us, because God created all of us. So, you know, so this is what he's trying to tell everybody: to pay attention, to be awake, to watch and pray, and understand that there's going to be temptations. There's going to be, you know, the devil's out there and he's trying to lure us away. He's trying to divide us instead of bringing us together. And so the Spirit is going to draw us together. It's going to give us strength. But he knows that if he can separate the sheep away from each other, then it's easier for the wolves to capture the sheep and take them away. If they all stay together as one in one big group and they're following the shepherd can keep them safe. If the sheep scatter and they're all different directions, then they can get picked off. And so he's trying to warn us here that flesh is weak. It's going to want to give up. It's going to want to quit. It's going to want to wander. It's going to want to look to the left. It's going to look to the right. But the Spirit's going to keep us in the center of his will if we're obedient. And we're looking. We're seeking his will. We're praying for him to reveal to us what we need. And Christ is trying to tell the disciples here, like, look, keep your eyes open, your spiritual eyes, and be looking around and see the things that are coming. Pray for understanding. Pray for the Father to show you what you need to do. Don't chase temptation. Don't look to the left and the right. Keep your eyes on me. I'm going to lead you to the Father. And he's saying the Spirit is strong. It's willing. It's going to be able to get you to where you're going, but the flesh is weak. So don't get in your physical. Stay in the spiritual. You know, when the body tells you that it's weak and it wants to give up, pray, seek me, have that renewed strength from the Spirit, because the Spirit can carry you. It's going to strengthen you. It's going to give you peace in the storm. It's going to give you joy when the things around this world are on fire and they're burning. You're going to have peace in God. You're going to have joy in the Spirit. You know, he can carry you through if you allow it. But you have to be prepared. And you have to watch. You have to pray. And you have to be obedient. He went away again the second time and prayed, saying, O my Father, if this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, thy will be done. So he's saying again, look, this is not going to be a pleasant thing. I'm not necessarily, excited about the things I'm going to have to go through, but I understand that this is my job. This is what I have to do. And if the people that we love, our people, your sons and your daughters, if they're going to be saved, I have to do this. So he says, if I have to be the one to do this, I'm going to step up and do it. He's saying if it can't be any other way, then I'm going to be obedient. I'm going to drink this cup if it has to be mine to drink. And so he's saying, thy will be done. Again, he's being obedient even unto death. And he knows what's coming. This wasn't a surprise. God gave him the full directions. He knows. He has understanding. He knew before, the world was formed, he knew that he was going to have to lay down his life at some point. And his time is at hand. So again, he's saying, I'm going to go through this because I understand what the end goal is here. I understand that I have to be the sacrifice. If the people are going to be saved, if we're going to repair that relationship that sin has tore us apart and tore our people away from us, I have to go and do this to repair that. I have to be that bridge, to bridge that gap that sin created. And he knew that. So he said, if this can't pass for me, then I'm going to do it because it's your will. I accept it. And he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. So again, his inner circle, though, there's people that he was needing the backup from that were supposed to be praying for him, helping him. They fell asleep. There's human limitations on us. And we can't always be there to support each other, but God can. Because every time he talked to God, God heard him. His Father heard him. And so he was putting all his faith in his Father, our Father, and he knew that his friends were going to let him down because they couldn't always be there. And it's not because they were bad. It's not but they were just tired and they physically couldn't handle all this. It had been a long day. They were exhausted. And they gave up. Sometimes we can't always be there for each other. We always need to do our best to do that, but we have to understand our faith has to be in God and God alone. We can confident other people. They can support us. They can help us. And there's times that we need somebody to help us. But God has to be first. And he left them and went away again and prayed the third time, saying the same words. So we went back to him again. And he was like, and if the count's correct there, he prayed for almost 3 hours. And some people are like, man, it's hard for me to pray 5 minutes or 10 minutes and things. And, but the more time we spend in prayer, the more we're going to, let this body be pushed aside and let the Spirit be strong in us. Just like he told us before, the Spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. So if we can push aside, and sometimes we need to pray until we get the answer that we want. Sometimes we need to pray for God to give us that answer, to come to us and comfort us. Sometimes it's going to take more than 5 minutes. Sometimes it may be an hour or 2 or 3. And of course, none of us are ever going to face the burden that Christ had here, but he's showing us that example. He prayed until he was satisfied. He prayed until he got the answer that he wanted. He prayed until God gave him the strength that he was going to need to do this task that was before him. So you ask me, well, how long do I need to pray? I can't tell you that because sometimes I don't even know how long I need to pray. You just got to pray until you feel God move and that he's give you the answer that you need. And sometimes we just need to listen until he speaks to us. It's not always about us talking. Sometimes we need to hush and listen, to be still and be quiet and let him talk to us. And, that's between you and him. It's something I can't work out for you, but, I do strongly encourage you to pray until you get the answer that you're looking for. Because he's not going to leave you hanging. He's going to come to you. He's going to give you what you need if you truly seek him with your heart. Christ told us, if you knock, it'll be opened. If you ask, you'll receive. But you have to ask with your heart, not just your mind. Then cometh he to his disciples, and saith unto them, Sleep on now, and take your rest. Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. So we say, there is a time to rest. There's a time to get up and work and do. And he was saying, you all are tired. You need this rest, because he knew what was coming. He knew where they were at, and he knew what was going on. And he's saying the hour is at hand. He knew his time was there. Rise, let us be going. Behold, he is at hand that doth betray me. So he knew that Judas was coming. He knew that he was bringing that tiny army there that was supposed to come and get him. And the time was there, and it was now. So he prayed till he was satisfied. And then, of course, like I said, God doesn't do anything out of time. It's always perfect and there. And so, he answered Christ. And then the wheels that were kept moving there for his betrayal was answered there at that time. God allowed him time to be prepared. And then he was ready, because he was seeking him. He was watching. He was praying. He was being obedient. We're not caught off guard when we're walking in the center of his will. But how do we walk in the center of his will? Just like he told us. We watch, we pray, we let the Spirit lead us and guide us. We avoid the temptations, and we let the Spirit guide us and give us our strength. And while he yet spake, lo, Judas, one of the 12, came, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now he that betrayed him gave them a sign, saying, Whomsoever I shall kiss, that same is he, hold him fast. And of course, that it was a custom of that day to when, people were they knew each other, they had a strong relationship. This wasn't a mouth thing, this was on the cheek. There's a lot of culture still in this time, that's just like a greeting that they had. And so, it said that, the person that I go and kiss, that's going to be the one. And so they would know who they needed to take. And forthwith he came to Jesus and said, Hail, Master, and kissed him. So we have Judas here, and it's interesting to think about this dynamic, that he was at the supper with him. Jesus had washed his feet too, just hours before this. He had washed his feet, knowing full well he was going to betray him. He offered him bread. He offered him wine. He offered him, to feed him too. And then, he said, one of you is going to betray me. And Judas knew who it was. And he asked him then, he goes, is it I? He knew it was going to be him. But Christ still treated him the same, knowing he was going to be the one. And so Judas comes here now, and he even says this again to him, Hail, Master. So he told him, like he greeted him like he would have, like he was still a friend, even though knowing that he was about to betray him. And I thought that was interesting to think, that he still wasn't quite ashamed. It still hadn't grasped Judas, I don't believe, what he was really doing here. He was still in the flesh. The Spirit hadn't revealed to him what he was really doing to Christ in this situation. I don't think he'd fully grasped what he was actually doing here. He wasn't in his right mind, whatever it may have been, I don't know. But, he still said he was calling him Master as he was betraying him. And Christ responded here, and Jesus said unto him, Friend, wherefore art thou come? Then came they and laid hands on Jesus and took him. So he still called him friend. And I think it's interesting. I had a note here in my Bible, and it says that was a deep thing, that he still called him his friend. He still loved him. He still called him friend. And I think that, Judas may have been doing that. Maybe it was out of spite. Maybe he was mocking him. Maybe he still didn't fully understand what he was doing. But I believe when Christ called him friend, he was still calling him friend. He was like, he goes, you're still one of mine, even though you betrayed me. It's like, I still love you. I still want to be your friend. And he said, what are you doing? Basically what he said here is like, friend, what have you come to do? What are you doing? And he gave him that choice to repent, to turn right then. He still had an opportunity there because Christ still called him friend. He still loved him, even though he'd done him as wrong as he could have. He was the one that was turning him over and setting him up for his false trial, the beating he was going to receive, and his death. But he still called him friend. He still loved him. So that gives us hope this morning, thinking, knowing that, people, you talk to people that have lost, they've been in sin for years, and they're like, well, I've done too much, I've went too far, I've been too far gone, and all these kinds of things. If the Spirit's drawing you, there's still hope for you. There's still hope. Here is Judas that had turned on him. He was the one that was going to set the wheels rolling, to have him condemned and beat and to be killed, and he still called him friend. He still loved him. And there's still that hope there, that no matter how far we've gone, if the Spirit's still drawing you, there's hope for you. Because Christ still loves you. And behold, one of them, which were with Jesus, which this is Peter, we know from the other accounts, stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck a servant of the high priest and smote off his ear. So here's Peter again. And like I said, I don't want to pick on Peter because I see a lot of myself with him. Also identify with him a lot because Peter had a lot of passion, and he was always wanting to do the right thing, but he would always get ahead of the Lord, and he would always try to get in front of him. Hadn't quite reached that spiritual maturity yet to wait on the Lord, to watch and to pray and to be led by the Spirit instead of trying to lead the Spirit. So Peter, he has all this passion, he has all this fire in him, and he's like, He goes, I done told you, that I wasn't going to deny you and that I wasn't going to run away. And even if I have to die with you, I'm going to stick with you to the end. So he pulls out his sword and he cuts off this guy's ear and he's like, I'm going to fight. They're not taking Jesus. He goes, as long as I'm here, he's my best friend. He's my savior. He's my Messiah. You're not going to take him. I'm going to fight. So he pulls out his sword and he cuts this guy's ears off. Peter has that passion in him. But he did it out of order because the thing, he already told him, he goes, I'm not going to let you take him. They had that conversation before. And remember, and Christ had told him, get behind me, Satan. But when Peter told him, no, you can't die. He said, get behind me, Satan, because he knew that he was confused. He goes, Christ had to come to die. That's what his purpose of being born and coming here was, that he had to be that sacrifice. It had to be that way. It was God's will. So here's Peter again. He's kind of got confused about that again. And he's trying to say, you're not going to take him. But Christ had to go. That was what God's will was. He had to be that sacrifice. So then said Jesus unto him, put up again thy sword into his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. So he's trying to say here, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. You can't just want to fight. There's a time and place that you fight. We read in the Old Testament, there's mighty warriors that, fought for Israel. David was a mighty warrior. All those mighty men that were with him. Joshua was a great warrior. There's time and a place for the fight. This wasn't the time and place to fight. If your first reaction is always to fight, Christ was telling you that's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to love first. Now, there is a time to fight, but this wasn't it. And Christ was trying to tell him that. And in this account, it doesn't say, but in the other ones, as we know, you put all of the stories together, you get all the details, that Christ picked up his ear and actually healed this man and put his ear back on his head, which astonished these people. But then they still yet took him to go to be put in prison and to be put on trial. You would think that they would see him do all these things out of peace and out of love and out of compassion for other people. And he did all these miracles that they wouldn't want to get rid of that there was something special about him. But they were caught up in the flesh. Like we talked about before, the flesh is weak. The spirit is strong and it's willing indeed, but the flesh is weak. So he goes on. Thinkest thou that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? So, Christ knew that he had all the power of heaven and earth and the universe at his hands. He had all that power and all that authority, and all he would have had to have done was say, Father, I don't want to do this, save me. And it says that he could have called more than 12 legions of angels. Well, I did some research and I looked up what legion could be. At the very least, every definition for legion I could find was 1,000. At the most, some of the Roman legions in their army could be up to 6,000 people. So we have a range here from 1,000 to 6,000. He said that more than 12. So we'll just go with the minimum here. So at least he could have called and got 12,000 angels to come. And at the most, that would have been 72,000 angels. And you think about that, well, how big a deal is the fact that you could have had 12,000 up to 72,000 angels come and defend him and to take him? Well, if you read back in the Old Testament, there were several accounts where Israel was outnumbered. They were outgunned, they were outmanned, and there were mighty armies that were set up against them. And they prayed to God saying, Lord, if you don't move, your people are going to be wasted because this mighty army is here. They've threatened us. They come to kill us. And we read how one angel wiped out entire armies, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of soldiers that were against Israel. And that was one angel in one night's time wiped out a whole entire army. So what do you think 72,000 angels could have done? He had that power at his hand. All he had to do was say, Father, send them down. I'm not going to do this. And just in an instant, 72,000 angels could have appeared. Now, what kind of damage could that have done? They could have annihilated everybody on earth and took him back to heaven, and then we would have all been lost because we didn't have that chance and opportunity. But he knew. He loved us enough that he said, I can save myself. All I got to do is call to the Father. He says, but I want to save you. That's how much he loved us. And so as we go on with this and we see what happens to him, we need to keep that in mind. that he had all the power and authority in the whole entire universe to stop this. He had a choice. He didn't have to do it, but he chose to because he loved his Father, and he wanted to be obedient, and he loved us. He went through everything he did because he loved us that much. And so we need to hang on to that and understand. 12,000 angels would have been enough to have annihilated earth and saved him and took him back. But he could have had 72,000 or more. It doesn't say. It says more than 12 legions. But anyways, he loved us enough to not do that. He laid himself down. He made that choice. The flesh with him was crucified before he ever went to the cross. His flesh was not in charge. His spirit was. And God's spirit was in him. He was full of God's spirit. And he was obedient even unto death because he loved us. He wanted to save all of us. Every one of us. Even the worst of the worst, the people that we think that don't deserve it, don't have a chance. None of us deserved it. None of us should have had a chance. But he loved us enough that we did. We need to hold on to that. That's how much he loved us. And he goes on. But how then shall the scriptures be fulfilled that thus it must be? And he said, the word says this has to happen. This was written, thousands of years ago. And God knew before it was ever written down, before the beginning of this world, that this moment was going to come. This is my time. This was my job. This is what I was created to do. This is who I am. I have to fulfill this for the Father and be obedient so that you all can be saved. In that same hour said Jesus to the multitudes, Are ye come out as against a thief with swords and staves for to take me? I sat daily with you teaching in the temple, and ye laid no hold on me. But all this was done that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples forsook him and fled. So he told them, he was like, why do you come here with swords and staves? Did you think I was ever going to fight? When did I ever fight with you? He goes, when was I ever anything but peaceable? He goes, I sit in the churches. I sit right there with you in the temple, and I taught. I spoke. I was a man of peace. I was a man of love. But you come to me with war. And he was like, why? Why do you fear me? And it's what it was. It's that they feared him. That's why they came with him like that. Because they knew he had power. They knew that he had authority. When he spoke, it shook their inner core and their soul of who they were. And they were afraid of him. Because they didn't want to grasp and let go of that control over that they had. They had power. They had control on this earth. They had physical power and physical control. But he had spiritual power and spiritual control. And that freaked them out, so to speak. That made them scared. It made the chief priests and the scribes and the Sadducees and the Pharisees and all those people that had this physical power, earthly power, they were afraid because they knew that what they had couldn't stand up to what he had. Just going back to verse 41 again, that the spirit is indeed willing and strong and has power, but the flesh is weak. They knew what they had wasn't real. They knew what they had could be destroyed, it could be taken away. And they knew what he had was different. It was a real power. It was a true power. It was from God. And instead of embracing it, they feared it. And so they came armed and with weapons because they knew they couldn't just grab him and take him unless he wanted to be taken. And so he said, the scripture had to be fulfilled. It had to be this way. The prophets warned us. They told us, just like all the things that are to come. We need to be watching and praying because the signs are here. And they didn't heed those signs. The church of the day, so-called, the people that were in charge of the church, they missed Christ the first time because they were too wrapped up in themselves and the physical things. They weren't looking with their spiritual eyes. And then, of course, we see here, once they took him, all his disciples left. We went back in verse 35, Peter said he'd never leave him. Just a few moments ago, he was cutting people's ears off and ready to fight to the death. And then now he's even flown. He ran away. All the disciples said, yeah, we'll not deny you either. They all left. They all ran away. He was alone. Once the rubber met the road, sort of say, like when all the things started happening, they grabbed him to go take him away. Everybody got scared. They got back in the flesh and they left. And they that had laid hold on Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. So they had their little mock trial set up here, and they brought him all in here, and they've already set him up. They know how this is going to go. This is just a sham. This is not a real trial, because they don't have any evidence against him. He didn't do anything wrong. All it was is that the truth that he spoke hurt their feelings. Well, what does that sound like in society today? Somebody speaks the truth that hurts somebody's feelings, and then they start crying and whining about it and say, well, you can't say that because it hurts my feelings. Well, that's very immature. When it's spiritually immature, it's physically immature. We need to be adults. People can say things that are going to hurt our feelings. And when it's the truth, guess what? That's our call to step up. And they didn't step up. Like we talked about before. They had that earthly, physical, fleshly power and control. And that spiritual power scared them. And instead of embracing it, they rejected it. And that's why they thought they had to kill Christ. They had to get rid of him because he was messing with their comfort zone they were in. But Peter followed him afar off under the high priest's palace and went in and sat with the servants to see the end. So Peter decided after he was running, you know what? I need to go back and see what's going on. What's really going on here? He still hadn't grasped on to the fact that Christ was going to die. He still didn't want to believe that. He wanted to go see what was going to happen. Now the chief priests and elders and all the council sought false witnesses against Jesus to put him to death. So they're going out. They're trying to find somebody to lie. It's a false witness. It's exactly what it is. They wanted somebody to lie, to go and say, he said this, he did that, because they didn't have a case. They didn't have anything on him. There was nothing he done wrong. He just told them the truth and it hurt their feelings. But found none, yea, though many false witnesses came, yet found they none. At the last came 2 false witnesses. So they kept looking and looking and looking. They couldn't find anybody. And, it doesn't necessarily say it here, but, they probably found somebody and they probably paid them. It's probably what wound up happening. It doesn't say that for sure, but they kept looking and digging and digging and digging. And, eventually, if you go to the bottom of the trough enough, you're going to find something that's going to stink that you want. And that's what they did. They finally found somebody that was going to lie. And they said, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days. And so that's what they said against him. Okay. Well, again, they were looking at this and they were saying, that, he's going to tear down this temple and he's going to rebuild it in 3 days. And it's like, it took us years and years and years to build this temple. So they said, he's crazy, he's a liar. But what they didn't understand is that he was talking about his body. Because he was changing things. He was moving things forward and was offering everybody a closer, deeper commitment and relationship with God. Because our bodies were going to become the temple that God's Spirit lives in. It wasn't going to be a building. It wasn't going to be 4 walls and a roof anymore. Christ had come to change things. He was going to fulfill that void and that hole that was in everybody's heart with himself. With the Spirit, with God's truth, with His Word. He was going to fulfill that sin debt that we all contributed to. And they didn't understand that He was talking about, you're going to destroy my body, but on the 3rd day it's going to be reborn. It's going to be resurrected. It's going to come back. It's going to be rebuilt better than ever. They were still looking with their physical eyes. They were refusing to see the spiritual. And the high priest arose and said unto him, answerest thou nothing? What is it in which these witnesses against thee? And he kept saying, what are your answers? This is what we're saying you did. What are your answers? He didn't say anything because they weren't saying anything. They were lies. He didn't have to answer to that. The truth doesn't have to defend itself. The truth is what it is. It stands alone. It doesn't have to defend itself because it's the truth. But Jesus held his peace, and the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure thee by the living God, that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God. And so they're sitting here, they're berating with all these things, they're throwing these questions at him, they're trying to get him to speak, to trip him up, to try to get something, but there's nothing there. It says he held his peace. That's something that's hard for me to do, but there's a lesson in that this morning. Sometimes when people are talking against you, they're saying all these things, they're trying to tear you down, it's just best to just keep your mouth shut and let the truth come out, because the truth always comes out. Just had a conversation with my son this morning about this, that the truth always comes out. Sometimes it takes a couple hours. Sometimes it's days, it's weeks, it may be years. But the truth always comes out because it's light and it's good and it's holy and it's pure. It's always going to work its way back out, and it's going to be out in the sun, and people are going to see these things because it's the truth. It cannot be buried. It cannot be killed. It's going to stand on its own. And so he said nothing to him. Then he finally answers him and said, Jesus saith unto him, Thou hast said, Nevertheless I say unto you, Hereafter shall ye see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. So he's saying, he goes, you said all these things, but here's the truth again, and he tells them the truth. So then here's this high priest. How does he take this answer again? He hears the truth and he throws a hissy fit just like a little child that didn't get his way. Then the high priest rent his clothes, saying, He has spoken blasphemy. What further need have we of witnesses? Behold, now ye have heard his blasphemy. So he gets mad, rips his clothes, starts screaming and throwing a fit and saying all these things because Christ told him the truth again, and it hurt his feelings. He didn't like it. What think ye? They answered and said, He is guilty of death. So they want to kill him for just speaking the truth. So we have to take a lesson in that and understand that when we speak the truth, this world's going to hate us because it hated our master. It hated Jesus. It hated him for speaking the truth. It's going to hate us. We're going to lose friends when we speak the truth. We may lose jobs when we speak the truth. We may lose this, that, whatever it may be. We may lose positions or power or money, whatever it is. We may lose things for the truth. But we have to walk in obedience to God. He has to be first. We have to keep him first. And understand that he's always going to provide for us. He's going to take care of us if we're walking in the center of his will. So now they're wanting to kill him. They're wanting to sentence him to death. But they're still under Roman law, so they don't have that power and they don't have that authority to do so. Then did they spit in his face and buffeted him, and others smote him with the palms of their hands. So they started spitting on him. They started slapping him, smacking him. They were hitting him. They were beating on him. Saying, Prophesy unto us, thou Christ, who is he that smote thee? So they got angry. He won't say anything they can use against him. They're mad. They've hurt his feelings, and now they're being bullies. They're like, well, we're going to provoke him to hit us. We're going to provoke him to anger. They're going to bully him and pick on him to start beating him. Well, he still doesn't give in. And so they start mocking him. They're like, if you're Christ, if you're the Savior, if you have all this power and authority from God, you're God's Son, then they say, tell us who hit you. Because, they were behind him. He couldn't see what was going on behind him. They were beating and hitting on him. So they're mocking him, they're teasing him, they're tempting him. And they're saying all these nasty things while they're beating him up. They were bullying him. He keeps his mouth shut. There's something that we can learn there. Sometimes it's just best to keep our mouth shut. And that's very hard for me to do. I like to talk. Anybody that knows me, I like to talk. Sometimes it's just best to just shut your mouth and let the truth speak for itself. That's a lesson to learn. It's a hard one for me. I try to do a little bit better about it, but, I am a talker. But Christ was showing us here. Sometimes it's just best to hush, let the Lord do his business, let him do his work. And let the truth stand for itself. Now Peter sat without in the palace, and a damsel came unto him, saying, Thou also wast with Jesus of Galilee. So here's the first time somebody's calling Peter out. Hey, you were with that Jesus guy. But he denied him before them all, saying, I know not what thou sayest. So here he is. And a couple hours before, he was willing to die. He cut somebody's ear off. He was ready to fight to the death with Christ. And now he's saying, I don't know what you're talking about. No, I don't know what you're talking about. That Jesus guy, no, I wasn't with him. No. So he's backtracking because he was scared. He got back in the flesh. He got back into that flesh that's weak. He was suppressing the spirit, which could have gave him strength. Again, he was just spiritually immature. He hadn't grown spiritually yet. We've all found our place in that. Let's not condemn Peter for that. Christ didn't condemn him. He told him it was going to happen. He knew. He works it out with him later. But again, we need to understand that we got to grow spiritually mature. We have to grow in the Spirit. That's something that we keep working at all our lives until he calls us home. we have to keep growing and mature spiritually. We don't ever get to a point to where we got it all whooped, we got it all figured out, that we've got so strong in the Spirit that there's nothing else we can do and learn and grow. We can always keep growing and get a little bit closer. That spiritual maturity, that's what Peter was lacking. But he made up for it later. Lord willing, we'll get there someday. But he denied before them all, saying, I know not what thou sayest. And when he was gone out into the porch, another maid saw him, and said unto them that were there, This fellow was also with Jesus of Nazareth. So somebody else said, hey, there's that guy. He was with that Jesus guy that they've got in the hall there that they're putting on trial. He's one of them. He was with him. And again, he denied with an oath, I do not know the man. So again, he says, no, I don't know. No, I'm not with him. I don't know him. I'm just here, for other business, whatever it might have been, and whatever it was he said. But I don't know him. That's two. And after a while came unto him they that stood by, and said to Peter, Surely thou also art one of them, for thy speech bewrayeth thee. And they said, You talk like him. You sound like you're from the same place he is. You're one of his boys. You were with him. Your speech, the way you talk, your accent, we're all from Kentucky, most of us here, I believe. And so, we travel places. They say, you must be from Kentucky. You sound like you're from there. We all sound like where we're from. We all have accents, It's different places in the country, different places in the world. They have accents. We sound like where we're from. We're who we are. We should be proud of who we are, where we're from. But then he says, no, again, he's like, they're telling him, hey, you talk like him. You're one of them. Then began he to curse and to swear, saying, I know not the man. So this time, not even was he just denying him, but it says he curses and he swears. And he said, no, it's not him. And he's been adamant about it. That passion's coming up in Peter again. That fire that he has in him. And he's there and he's like, no, it's not me. And he's probably beating his hands and he's waving his hands around. He's like, it wasn't me. It's not me. No, it's not him. But then what happened? That was three. That was the third time. And just as soon as he did, he says, I know not the man. And immediately the cock crew. And then that closed with Peter. He understood. He goes, I didn't want to do this. I said I would never do it, but Christ told me it was going to happen. And so it did. And Peter remembered the word of Jesus, which said unto him, Before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And he went out and wept bitterly, because it come home to him. His spiritual eyes were finally opened. And I was just sitting here this morning reading this again. I can't tell you how many times I've read this. Several times this week before, but it just hit me. The Spirit revealed to me. Why was Peter the one that had to deny him? Why was it Peter? He was the one that was so adamant about he was going to be there, but Peter was the one that kept getting hung up in the flesh because he was spiritually immature, and he kept saying, I'm not going to let him kill you. I'm going to stop it. I'm not going to let it happen. He hadn't quite grasped yet that Christ had to die. He was that sacrifice. He wasn't spiritually ready to let go. He wanted to control the situation. He wanted to protect Jesus, which was a good thing. You want to take care of your friends. You want to do this, your family, those around you. But sometimes you have to let them go because they have to go through something on their own because that's what they're supposed to do. It's what they were called to do. So Peter wouldn't let go. He wouldn't let go of Christ. He wouldn't let him go do what he was called to do, what he was meant to do. He was trying to hold him back because his eyes were not open spiritually yet. And I think when this happened, that's when that change started to happen because he swore, I will never deny you. I'll fight to the death for you. He cut a man's ear off for him, but then he ran away and then he denied him 3 times. He had to understand, he had to go through that to understand that the word has to be fulfilled above all things. God's will has to be done. It's going to be done. There's nothing that can stop God's will, His word, because it's the truth and it stands by itself. You can't hold it back. You can't stop it. You can get crushed by it because you rebel and that you resist it. It can crush you. Or you can get behind it and follow it and go through. Peter had to learn that lesson. He had to understand. So he had to go through that and understand that it had to happen that way. That's what Christ came for. He was come to be that perfect sacrifice that we could be saved. If he didn't lay down his life, we would all perish and we would all been lost. He had to die. And that's what he come to do. And so Peter was denying that. He said, I don't want that to happen. I don't want your will to happen, Father, because I don't want you to take Jesus from me. But he wasn't taking Jesus from him. He was setting him free so that we could have him always. And Peter hadn't understood that yet. So we don't want to fault Peter. You know, who's to say any of us would have done anything different? If the Spirit hadn't revealed these things to us, we wouldn't know. If we didn't have this word to study, and we didn't study it, and we didn't understand, the Spirit didn't teach us and show us these things, we wouldn't understand either. So we're not going to hate on Peter. He was just doing the best that he could, but he was spiritually immature. This was one of those things he had to go through to get a little bit closer to God and to have his eyes opened. So, why do we go through the things that we do in life? Because sometimes we have to understand God has to take all those other things away from us that we lean on, that we hold on to, that we put before him, that we trust in. And he has to take those all away from us sometimes so that we can come to that realization that it has to be him alone. He has to be first. That other people are going to fail us. And it may not be their fault because we have physical limitations. I can't be in 3 places at once. If 3 of my friends need me to do something and they're all in different locations, I cannot help all 3 of them at once. But God can. He can be in 3 places at once. So we have to put him first. He has to be first. He asks us to be that. That's the first commandment. He actually demands that he be first. So we can have friends we confident, but God has to be the only thing we rely on as number one. Peter had to learn that lesson. And I think that's why he had to go through what he did. Because then he went away, he repented of that, and he wept bitterly. And I think that he started to come to that understanding that God has to be first. And above all other things, this word is going to be fulfilled. And like I said, the truth stands on its own. We're either going to be crushed by it, or we're going to follow in behind it, and it's going to change us, and we're going to be reborn in it and made new through that blood and through this word. And so we'll end there today, and next week we'll pick up and move on, Lord willing.